that's the viola part for the Handel's Hornpipe from his Water Music Suite. With this piece, the hardest thing is to play musically, stylistically, and then also making sure that we're very accurate with our bow placement and intonation. So a lot of this and Handel's music tends to be dances. These dances have to be very articulate. So to play articulate, we often use a bow stroke which is called martelet. So the martelet bow stroke literally means hammer-like. So we have to play very percussively with our instruments. So this hammer-like sound will generally only happen with our quick notes, like 8th notes and 16th notes, in the lower half of the bow. If we find ourselves getting up to the upper half, then it tends to get a little bit more legato and we kind of lose the control. So a lot of it needs to be happening in the lower half. You'll notice that I tend to use more bow like on the dotted quarter notes or the half notes, dotted half notes. Those I'll spend more bow, but generally when I'm playing the 8th notes, it's going to be in the lower half. So to start it off, the most important thing is to know when to use your 4th fingers versus open strings. So I didn't mark everything in your part, but when we get to, as we play the first note, that open G, you can use your 4th finger. The only thing is you have to practice going from the C string to the G string and not making much of a sound at all when you do hop from one string to the other. So I use my 4th finger so I can vibrate. And the nice thing about the style of the piece is it's not legato, so you can move your finger between the space of the notes and make sure we accurately put space between all of our quarter notes. So it shouldn't sound, you should have space. Working on those bowings. So if you noticed how I put these up bow markings, that's not to make your life more difficult, which it is harder to do, but it's so that we place the accent in the right part. So the accent generally we want to have on a down bow. And in this case, a hornpipe characteristically has the accent falling on the and of the beat. So if you look at measure 2, this G should be a down bow. Measure 3, the quarter note should be a down bow. Same thing with measure 4, the quarter notes should be the down bows. So if we're playing from the beginning, we feel that accent there, right? And I would really recommend using 4th fingers for all those Ds just so you can vibrate and give a little bit more warmth to everything. So practice measure 2 and 3 and 4 all carefully. Measure 2 starts on an up bow. So and feeling those up, up so that your down bow for the quarter note is strong. Going on from there, measure 5, 6, try and give a little bit more inflection on the 8th note so that they feel like they're moving forward. And it's marked down to a piano. So we're still in the lower half of the bow. And you can use more weight to achieve the fortes versus pianos. And when we play piano, it's just trying to be light with the bow. Still achieving that good characteristic sound of martelet and putting space between our quarter notes. Measure 15, we actually get the melody here, so it's really important that we're nice and strong and we know this section really well. So 15. So knowing that section really well is going to help you out tremendously. Still, the characteristic style has to be there, playing space between the quarter notes, and then having that up in measure 16 to 17, 17 to 18. It's the same style of bowing that we did for the opening 4 bars, but now we actually have to change pitch. So I would practice that carefully and get really comfortable with those 4 bars. Going on from there, measure 19. Right, same sort of thing whenever we have those 8th notes. Feel them move forward so that it's going to the downbeat of measure 20. 22 works exactly the same way. Right, and then still playing the space between those quarter notes. 31, please do forgive the skip and the rest. So measure 28 through 30, you do need to count those 3 measures of rest. It's just, I'm trying to get through as many videos as I can. So it tends, I just skipped them and I moved on to the music. So be aware that you have to count those 3 bars. So 1, 2, 3, 2, 2, 3, 3, 2, 3, and then you come in at 31, 1, 2, and then you're on the and of 2, right? Just going back a second, I kind of skipped this at measure 25. We have the dotted quarter note hooks. So when you see measure 25, you have I'm sure your teachers have talked about dotted quarter notes or dotted half notes. Anytime you put a dot after a note, that basically will extend that note further by half of its value. So if it's a quarter note, in 3/4 time, a quarter note gets 1 beat, so half of 1 is going to be a half, so it becomes 1.5 beats. If you have a half note, well, the half note gets 2. If you put a dot on it, that's going to be half of 2, which is 1, so 2 plus 1 equals 3, so a dotted half note gets 3 beats, right? So in this case, we're going to get to measure 25, and we're going to hold that C sharp for 1.5 beats, and then it's going to move on the and of 2, so it's 1, 2, and 3, right? So when you play measure 25, feel 1, 2, and 3. Right? So be aware how those dotted quarter notes work, and then also work on the hooks. So when you're doing your hooks, I would practice like a scale. Make sure that you're counting 1, 2, and 3, 4. And make sure you know that you're moving on the and of the beat. And then also, the reason why we do those hooks is just so that it doesn't stick out. So if I play, we would get this big up bow and it would create an accent. And if we had like 20 violas playing with that big up bow, it would really be noticeable. So we want to make sure we're putting in those hooks and we're not overplaying the 8th note to follow the dotted quarter notes. When we get to measure 31, it's very similar, and 33 again we get to those same dotted quarter notes, and we got to get those hooks in there. So you're going to go from measure 33, the G, and you're going to hook into the E. So you have the string crossing with the hook. And if you're like me, where I don't like using open strings, I'll use my 4th finger on the C string, but then you got to rock all the way over to the D string and get that hooked E in there. So make sure that if you're going to do those 4th fingers, that you get a really clean hook, and that you don't hear any other noises or sounds coming from your instrument as you rock from the C string to the D string. And then the rest of it plays very similarly, measure 35. Measure 40, and the rest of this page is actually rather difficult. We have a lot of these bow lifts. Every time you lift your bow, you want to make sure you always set your bow before you move on. So every time you get to an eighth rest, basically it's going to be the same kind of bow lift that you see in measure 40. So lift, set, set, set. I don't want to hear students doing to avoid that. You want to always make sure you set your bow and then you move. Set. 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 So you're always starting from the string rather than coming down on the string. The other thing is to make sure that we have the inflection for all those repeated eighth notes, or just the eighth notes in general, so that the eighth notes move to the downbeat. So you have this at measure 40. So that you have you're making the music do something rather than just playing the notes. And it follows suit all the way until you get to about measure 49. Then we get to some interesting notes like D sharps. So the D sharp can be played with a high 4, but in this case I put the low 1 because you're going to be moving to the D string anyways for measure 51. So that low 1 right is it'll kind of be easier in some ways, but you got to make sure that you keep your thumb still. So when you're doing low 1 on the D string, make sure your thumb should stay with your first finger. And then as you do your low 1, you want to make sure that the low 1 moves back, but then the thumb stays still. So low 1 moves back, thumb stays still. This way, when you do go to the F sharp, you can memorize the feeling of your hand. So you have your 1, you jump down to the low 1, and then you feel that F sharp go down just like you've done it a million times, I'm sure. But this way, your thumb acts as a reference point, so your first finger knows exactly where to go. I'm sure many of you have tapes on your instruments, but sometimes we can't always rely on tapes. So use your ear. Also use your thumb as a reference point, so that way you know where to go back to. So that's something to work out, is measure 51, getting that D sharp going up to the F sharp. So come back to first position from that low 1 to regular 1, and then you won't miss that F sharp. And then the rest of it kind of plays through. So 53. Right, and then 59. Get to the DC al fine. So when you say the DC literally means da capo, which means go back to the head of the piece, the top of the piece. And then al fine means to finish at the fine. So we stop at the fine, which is measure 39. So basically you play all this over again a second time. And then when you get to measure 38, it says RIT period 2x, RIT 2x, which RIT is short for ritardando, and then 2x means second time. So the second time we play it through, we're going to do a ritardando, gradually slowing it down. So when you get to measure 36, once you get to 38, you should feel those eighth notes pull back. And then same thing with the quarter notes. So sure we've put the space in there and that we're really listening so that we stay together, and then follow up with the director, who will give you very clear articulations about where to place those quarter notes. So I hope you found this video informative, helpful. practice carefully. Don't try and practice right along with this video. I would highly recommend that you kind of pause whenever there's something that is difficult or that you're not quite sure of. Try it on your instrument, work it out, and then once you know that you've completed that section, then you can resume the video. So try and remember where you pause from, especially if you have to do something else and you have to come back to your practice later, and you might not have your video still up. Try and remember roughly where you are as far as your time on the video goes, and then just resume from wherever you left off. So good luck and happy practicing.